Mr. Genuis, you're up. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. A quick question to the officials to start off with. Ballpark, how much has the government lost as a result of contracting fraud in the last 9 years?
I don't think we have figures that go back 9 years. We can try to come back with an answer. We can tell you that from what we've seen in our referrals to the RCMP, we're at 4.5 million and counting.
I mean, that's in specific referrals to the RCMP, but we've talked about so many other practices that are fraudulent. Do you have a ballpark sense of how much has been lost as a result of misrepresentation, breaking of various kinds of rules?
Merci pour la question. I do not have such information.
Okay. If you can try to come back to the committee with that, I'll move on. The Arrive Scam contractor GC Strategies has gotten a lot of attention. Dalian has gotten comparatively less, even though Dalian is also a two-person company involved in the contract. They appear to have also done no actual work on the app. Dalian had been identified by the government as an indigenous company, and they operated in joint venture with Corodex, which allowed Corodex, a larger non-indigenous company, to get contracts under the indigenous set-aside. Dalian has now, though, been removed from the indigenous business list. Can our officials advise why Dalian was removed from the indigenous business list? Were they never indigenous? Did they cease to be indigenous? What happened there?
Thank you very much for the question. I believe this was raised at OGO with my colleague Gina Wilson. She answered the question as they are the owner of the Indigenous Business Directory and is best placed to answer those questions of indigeneity. What I took from the testimony was that they no longer met the corporation structure.
Yeah, the testimony we heard from Indigenous Services officials was, quote, "We noted that Globe and Mail interviews with Dalian referred to changes in his corporation. That affected the 51% owned and controlled scenario. That was part of the reason we had to remove his business from the directory." So can I ask, is the Globe and Mail your usual source for information about who is and is not considered to be eligible for certain procurement programs?
Thank you very much for the question. In the case of the Indigenous service list or Indigenous business list, our source of authority on indigeneity and whether or not they can be on the list is ISK. We get our procurement
I guess what I'm asking just is more generally, like, what was shocking to me about that testimony is it's like officials telling us, well, we pick up the Globe and Mail, we read it, and that's our source for information for deciding eligibility for these procurement programs. It seems to me like the government should have a way of getting information to verify procurement requirements rather than hoping that a shady contractor would make the mistake of revealing information to the newspaper. Does this strike you as kind of a flaw in the system?
Well, I can describe, if you permit, some of the work that we do before we do business with a vendor from a procurement perspective. If that's reasonable, we do.
Well, I guess I'm just looking for information about, like, the sources of information for this kind of verification.
What we can do is also, oftentimes, they're going to be referred to ISK. So our procurement officer, in the course of their business dealing, they're going to be proactively referring contract for post-award audit to ISK, and ISK will undertake those audits. Also, in the case of Dalian, it's interesting to note that the reason why they got suspended at first, also, irrespective of the IBD, was that they found themselves in a conflict of interest situation. So,
I agree there were other problems, but they were taken off that list. I'll just say on Indigenous procurement, very clearly we have the sort of Spider-Man meme happening where procurement officials are pointing at ISK and ISK is pointing back at procurement. I asked a question in the House about this, and it was your minister, the procurement minister, who responded to it. So I wonder if this is why Indigenous leaders are telling us the program is such a mess. It's because you have kind of this ministers' departments pointing at each other and not getting it done. On this point, I want to ask the Auditor General quickly. You've been asked by Indigenous leaders to investigate abuses of the Indigenous procurement program, abuses that Indigenous leaders say are rampant. Can you give us an update on your plans and prospective timelines around investigating the Indigenous procurement program?
So we have begun the work on the Indigenous procurement, and we're looking at either the fall of 2025, spring of 2026 to make that that report public. I think it'll depend on access to information and timing. So, but it's in the works. It's begun.
Any way you can get that out, say, by August of 2025? I think, Indigenous leaders say that a majority of these contracts are problematic. So I think it's the sort of thing that Canadians might want to see before having to make any major decisions.
I don't think I have the parliamentary calendar committed to memory, but I do not believe Parliament sits in August, and Parliament needs to be sitting for me to be able to provide reports.
Thank you. That is the Mr. McCall. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to get back to the issue I was chatting about before. Now, help me out here. How does PSPC discover that there's this time theft and the general contractor is not doing that? I would think, having done large projects with contractors, the prime contractor is responsible. So how is it that PSPC is finding this fraud and the contractors are not? And the follow-up is GC Strategies was the prime contractor, but we went after them for a time theft issue and suspended them, but we're not doing it to the other prime contractors who seem to be suffering through the same lack of principles. And just briefly get to it, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it's important to note that each prime contractor hired the resource. So there's multiple prime contractors that have hired the same resource at the same time to work on different contracts. So each of them do not know that the other ones I have hired the same resource. So because we have access to information on those multiple contracts.
If multiple have hired the same person, if three of us have hired the same person for the same work, they're not getting the work. Like, how is the contractor not aware, hey, we've hired this person for 8 hours a day, we're not getting 8 hours of work out of them?
So maybe I could talk with, I think I grilled Madame Poulin on this when she first brought it to our attention. It's often these professional service contracts is on a as when needed basis. So they're not working, it's not necessarily transparent to the Crown or to the supplier. It's only through the invoice and the review of the work and the sign off that then these issues come to light.
Department's not aware they're getting robbed.
Thank you for the question. So, of course, there's an increased diligence that will need to be applied when looking at the work by the client.
Why now? Why are we just looking at this now? How is it with all the resources the government has? We have chief audit executives for every department who should be looking at risk assessments for large projects like this. How is it just now we're figuring this out?
What I can offer into that is that it's very hard because while there are a central repository for all contracts, there are no central repository for individual resources.
These groups across the whole breadth of government have been billing for services not provided, and every department is just cutting checks without verifying that this work has been done, that taxpayers have paid for. And if we did not have this arrived scam issue come before us, we'd be sitting here right now unaware.
Just on
and I'm
that.
going to just finish up quickly. I have heard from CFOs who have approached me saying this is endemic through government, through big companies, large contracting companies, management consultants, where they are billing departments for the same work 3 times. Like, CFOs have approached me. It seems to be widely known in the government that this is going on. Like, how is this possible?
Thank you for the question, Mr. President. It's what we are trying to do by doing those investigations. I find important to mention, however, that those investigations have started way before ArriveCan. So the first investigation that has been referred to the RCMP has started in 2021.
But if it's so widespread, even the Procurement Ombudsman is looking at it. But we've found 7 out of how many tens and tens of thousands of contracts? We even have a term for it, like the bait and switch that the Procurement Ombudsman is looking into, and yet
we're conflating issues. Resource substitution is not time stuff, right?
There is time theft going on.
And this is why we put the data analyticals. That's why we have done a total scrub. That's why we're working with every CFO in town. And that's why we also agree with what you're saying in the concept that if you're signing off on it, you need to have to make sure you're getting the goods. So there's an issue there, not just from the procurement lens, but throughout the project management and the FAA responsibilities.
It just seems throughout a whole government approach to being ripped off and poor oversight. It just seems like, and I'm expressing some frustration and also disbelief because there's a lot of parliamentarians, probably a lot of people watching have business background where they actually have to check that the work is being done that we've paid for, even if it has been, even if it's gone through a major contractor.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. I'll allow a reply if you have. Thank you very much. No, I think Mr. McCauley, it's your last 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. AG Hogan, can you update us on the progress of the GC strategies audit that you're doing right now? Or Mr. Hayes?
Yep, thank you. So we have started that audit. We've signaled to the central agencies that we are doing it, and indeed, I have to acknowledge that we're very happy with the collaboration we're receiving from Public Service Procurement Canada on this. At this point, we're identifying how far back we're going to be able to go on the basis of the records that are retained by government. Of course, there are document retention policies. There might not be things much.
The one retaining those documents, I guess, but
we're looking across the entire government at the records that are retained, and of course we will expand to Crown corporations. It's a little bit more complex to get all of the Crown corporations because they are individuals. So we will be reaching out to them in the near future. Obviously, we recognize that there's great interest in understanding the universe of contracts that were awarded to GC strategies, their principles, and any other derivatives. So we're going to try to accelerate that work as much as we can.
Ballpark finish date?
We're hoping to have some information that would be valuable to Parliament as soon as possible. We recognize the time pressures that parliamentarians are looking at.
Thanks. Mr. President, I just want to get back again to, as you probably imagine, this issue with the main contractors, I guess, being robbed by their subcontractors and therefore the taxpayers getting ripped off. Just curious, like, what are the departments saying when they are finding out that they're paying for services that haven't been delivered? And what are these general contractors saying?
Well, I can tell you that PSPC, I think, was one of the defrauded departments. And I'm very interested to understand, when you're signing an invoice and you're signing off that you've received the goods, is there an issue that is overestimated? Is it an issue that, they're working 10, 12-hour days? It's getting to the bottom line and reinforcing, because this is about project management and it's about financial controls. It is not necessarily a procurement issue. It is the technical authority.
The general contractors who, say you've got 3 of them, each getting billed 8 hours a day by one person, like, how are they justifying it? Like, how are they justifying it to the departments and therefore the taxpayers? I've been paying out money on your behalf for work that hasn't been done.
Thank you for the question. So important to mention once again that each prime contractor only bill once for that resource. So the resource is being billed by another prime contractor to another department. So
right. But somewhere along the lines, if one scam artist is billing the taxpayers 24 hours to 3 different contractors, we are not getting 24 hours of work. So how is it the contractor is not aware, and how is it the departments are not aware? Because if you look at the work being done right now on, say, Center Block, if you hire a carpenter to do X amount of work, he can't be billing for 24 hours of work for what is obviously just 8 hours. How is this slipping by not only the contractors, but also the departments?
Thank you so much for the question. So as you mentioned, it's not arriving with carpenters. So that's why all those fraudulent billing arrive in professional services and IT professional services. So again, each department, is looking at its own view, and each prime contractor.
Yes, but what you seem to be missing is these contractors are paying out for work that is not being done.
I would agree with you.
Right. So why are these contractors doing it? This is the contractors either defrauding government or being completely negligent, in which case they should be fired or banned from doing work with government. How is this going on, and why have we not terminated these contractors?
I think, the resources, often the prime is unaware because, again, it goes back to some of the issues we've seen in ArriveCan. If the deliverables aren't tight, if it's not clear, the contractor themselves may not know, and if the bill is being submitted, the invoice, and the department setting up. What you're pointing to is an issue, 100%. So from a procurement perspective, we're going after restitution. How we educate the contractors, because it's also their responsibility, as I've alluded to, it has a code of conduct. I'm saying it's the responsibility of contractors.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley, that is your time.
It's also the responsibility of the Crown to make sure they're signing off and getting the value.
Okay, yeah, I think you got the answer. Very good. I was going to allow a response there, but I think Mr. McCauley